Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. This will be a relatively short report covering Morats versus Steel Phalanx. In this game, I'm playing the Morat Aggression Force. This game was played on Saturday at a small local event that we had. The scenario is supplies and had been preceded by Comm Center, which you might remember from ITS Season 10, and would be followed by countermeasures. So the lists that you might see on play reflect that a little bit. This is the Morat list I ran. Now, this list is built primarily for countermeasures. It's got a very healthy order pool, but on top of that, it has lots of pieces that can do lots of classifieds. The med tech is a piece that I wouldn't necessarily include in a list like this normally. I'd be pretty comfortable with a Vanguard paramedic in case I needed, for example, to pick the Yowgat back up. But the med tech is both better at it, but also is very, very good at doing a whole variety of classifieds, being both a doctor and engineer, having a slave drone, and having decharges. The list also gives up access to guided missiles, which actually I've found kind of unnecessary with Morats to date, and uses those SWC to fit a Spitfire decharge Rassiat, which is one, a great attack piece, but two, also surprisingly good in countermeasures. It's got decharges and it's an elite troop that can literally appear in your opponent's deployment zone, and it's excellent at close combat, giving it sort of some surprisingly interesting coverage. On top of that, we have the OSNAT battery link team in Group 2, which can do one of two things. It can either exist to fuel the battery, or it can fuel attacks with Gakis and Pretas. I'm actually very comfortable running this as a Haris team of an OSNAT with one Gaki and one Preta, and then just flinging two Gakis forward impetuously, or running it as the full core and kind of doing the same thing. Basically, it's midfield, suppression, and support. These are actually really solid warbands that in vanilla combined are overshadowed by Taiga creatures, but when you can move them all together and literally make them all regular, it's pretty efficient, pretty effective. Combat Group 1 otherwise is built to fight and do classifieds. There's only one order-generating model, and R-Drone doesn't do much else. There's a Data Razi for smoke. Frankly, I would like more, but you can't have everything. And then there are 6 linkable models that can either form a core or a pair of 3-person teams. Morats have access to 2 Haris teams. You'll generally be running 2 or 3 fire teams in this list, combination of cores and Harises. I've actually been experimenting with Morat lists that run more fire teams than this. I've had one list where literally every model can start the game linked, and I think I like it. It's like playing Toha, but kind of better in some respects and worse in others. Really, really interesting. This doesn't lean into that quite as much because I have to take the medtech and I've chosen to take a Rassiat. I'm not going to say I had to take a Rassiat. Rassiat is a luxury piece and excellent. You could cut it from this list and get some very good things. I've left it in. So the 6 linkable models are Kornak for a really healthy order pool, 2 Dartok hackers, a Yowgat sniper, a Kaitok assault heavy infantry, and then an MSV1 Tinbot Suryat. Now that Suryat actually has been an all-star for me across a whole variety of games. Not only having a Tinbot is useful, but it just tends to be a better shooter than the heavy machine gun tactical awareness Suryat and is a bargain bin price for the cost. I know, yes, you have a significantly reduced burst compared to the heavy machine gun, but the ammunition on that heavy rocket launcher is much, much more dangerous, and the MSV1 really, really matters. I haven't yet had games where the short range capacity of the multi-pistol +1 burst has mattered, but I have had games where that's mattered in old Morats. So for now, I'm usually taking the heavy rocket launcher Suryat as my first Suryat, but I'll take a tactical awareness Suryat if I'm running more than one. I have had one Morat list that basically is built to create a 19 order list, which uses 2 HMG TAC-aware Suryats, basically building a Death Star link, and it's worked fine. It can't play the missions that I'm currently trying to build lists for, which Australian players will recognize as Novacore lists, Novacore scenarios, but it's still very, very strong. So this is what I was trying out today. This is a countermeasures list, but I figured they could play well in supplies because the med tech is a really useful supplies piece, and you will see that in the game to come. This is the Steel Phalanx list that my opponent ran, and it's also kind of teched to be able to play both supplies and countermeasures to an extent. It's also a sledgehammer. It's got an absolutely chunky core link. So 4-man, right, what we would call an Animatarkos link. 4-man Myrmidian link, so it's not a pure link because it has Hector, Ajax, Machaon, and Phoenix. And then a 4-person pure Thorkidi link of Nessa Alke, an engineer, a paramedic, a Fuerbach, And then the remaining 2 models are a Netrod and Andromeda. Now, for my money, I'm not actually 100% on the reproduction of this. I can't account for those last few points, and I'm 90% that this is things that he all had. For my money, this list can be significantly improved. Alki should almost certainly be replaced by Tharasmedes, he is a little more expensive, but packing a Mimetism -6 model at the head of a Thorakidi link really, really helps improve its ability to fight inactive. And then, yes, okay, actually I know this list is built for countermeasures, but that paramedic Thorakides can probably be downgraded, and realistically you could potentially ditch the engineer as well. Whatever you do, free up just a few points for a second combat group that consists of, if nothing else, a Warcore, ideally a Netrod and a Warcore. And the reason why is the second combat group means that your opponent can't discount the possibility of an Ectremoy or something else surprising waiting in the wings. Now, Phalanx don't have thermoptic camouflage models, things in hidden deployment, but they do have actually some very scary drop troops, just aren't particularly on meta. And if you look at this list and you kind of can't tell, like, this Phalanx is really expensive, but is it that expensive? This is only 10 models. Basically leaving some doubt that there might be something in that second combat group other than the Warcore that could transfer into the first combat group is a good way just to put your opponent on the defensive. On top of that, if you had points for a second Netrod, then if one model dies, you can just pay a command token, flip the Netrod into the first combat group, and hey, cool, you've got a chunkier water pool again. Now, that said, I like this as a list. Personally, I would prefer to play Phalanx a little wider. Hector is very expensive, but Ajax is incredible, Machaon is incredible, Phoenix is incredible. The core Thorakidi link you could potentially bring down to 3 troops, but it's getting pure link bonuses, so why not? Andromeda, I don't know how worth the point she is now with the reduction in infiltration, but on the other hand, if she succeeds, she does all the damage she used to, and her mere existence kind of forced my hand a little bit in this scenario, having to choose to go first, and on top of that, we'll see what she did. So, this is the map, and spoiler alert, you might already see where Andromeda is positioned there. This photo was taken after my deployment had finished. So I won the roll whip 14 to whip 15, and my opponent, I asked my opponent, answers he has a single combat group, which immediately suggests that I should go first. Actually think, no, pause for a second there. Public, I did not ask that question until I had chosen to go first, because it's not public information until at least the deployment step. But the decision to go first was heavily predicated on, well, 1, it's Phalanx, and 2, I know my opponent likes playing Hector, and 3, I know my opponent has access to Andromeda. So I just really was not prepared to wear the risk of a Phalanx Alpha Strike if I could avoid it. I just chose to go first on that ground. If your opponent has Andromeda, is a pretty serviceable reason to choose to go first. Now that said, my deployment was quite aggressive, perhaps too aggressive in retrospect. So, among other things, for example, we can see the Gaki and the Predator link deployed there, including 2 models just ballsy out in the open. The Datarazi here is also deployed visibly in the open, intending to impetuous forward. This is because I'd kind of evaluated my opponent's deployment zone, and there was a line starting from here that might have been able to see down and pin this Datarazi, but I otherwise evaluated the risk of heavy overwatch from my opponent into these positions as low, and I was probably going to end up being punished for that, actually. So, very aggressive deployment of impetuous troops, but everything else is prone. Another, not necessarily mistake, but thing I need to sort of consider is my reserve drops. By the way, I spent a command token, and I am pretty happy with this. My reserve drops were a Dartok, a Kaitok, and the Suryat, literally an entire offensive Harry's team. All 3 of these were a reserve. I've chosen to deploy them over here rather than put them in a position where they can be a core, and that is probably right, but I'm not 100% it's right. I think having the core bonuses on this the firefight that was about to happen here might have been very useful. That said, we've got Kornak, a Dartok, and a Yaogat, and this is a long-range fire team. The Kornak does not intend to go up the field too early. Yes, you're playing Morats, you are resistant to loss of lieutenant, but you're not immune to it. The Gakis all lack the veteran rule, the R-Drone and Dr. Worm lacks the veteran rule, and if you lose Kornak, you still lose all of his Strategos orders. Finally, we have Dr. Worm here and his slave drone here. They were actually deployed predicated entirely on access to, well, I mean, one, access to the Yaogat in case I needed to heal it, but two, there's a ladder on this side of the building there that would allow easy access into the midfield, which was going to be relevant. For my opponent's part, and this is his side of the table, some quite high midfield terrain, but there are some very long and clear lines. We've got Phoenix in a tower watching my rooftop. So if you think about my table, my Yaogat is in this direction, but it's not going to be able to see Phoenix from where it is. We've got Prone, Ajax, Prone Hector, Prone Machaon, and then the 4 Thorakides are here. Hippolyta is proxying Nesse Alke. There's also a net rod over this direction that I strongly considered going after with the Rassiat, but I eventually decided not to. So this is a really high and tight deployment with Phoenix ready to take some Overwatch and then potentially drop Prone, and Ajax being pretty careful about long-range shots. My opponent did the quick check from my deployment zone and determined that there might be some danger to Ajax from sort of like this terrain here, which is why he's prone rather than using his combi rifles to watch short-range bands. In terms of deployment, the only thing I might change is Phoenix is a long way from Doctor support, but that's probably fine. Also, he did need this positioning here is going to end up being a vulnerability. There are some ways that you can deal with that, particularly if the Link team, the Thorakides team, includes more 360 visor models, but he didn't quite have those and he didn't deploy perfectly for them. So this was going to end up being a little bit of an issue. So my reserve drop, as noted, is this entire Harris team here, which actually is pretty cool. I like being able to reserve deploy literally an entire Harris team. And my opponent's reserve is to deploy Andromeda. He makes the roll on a 12, and he deploys standing. And in the face of my order pool, which is 11 orders in the first combat group and 5 in the second at game beginning, rather than bothering trying to strip either of those groups, he puts Andromeda in suppressive fire. So that's immediately a problem, because I've kind of assumed that I would have a clear path out of my deployment zone, and any ranged attacks I would take would be with snipers and heavy rocket launchers. Also super relevant is this Syriat has gone down out of line of fire of Phoenix, but if it stands, it will be. It's expecting to be able to either have smoke in the way, or crawl forward, or whatever. It's not expecting to be in a position where I would really like it to move this way and engage Andromeda, and it can't, or at least it can't without some awkwardness. So what I choose to do is impetuous with this Datarazi and throw a smoke grenade here, not face-to-face with Andromeda, because it's not blocking line of fire. She shoots, she kills. This was 3 dice on 9s. She's ballistic skill 12, I think. I'll check that. Yep, she is ballistic skill 12, so 3 dice on 9s. Has a pretty reasonable chance to kill the Datarazi, and does, but the smoke goes down. I then get ahead of myself and make a mistake by having the Yaogat stand and take this face-to-face roll. Now, in this photo, it looks like it could be more than 16, but it is not. So I am firing on my 0 range band, and she is firing on her 0 range band. She's through smoke, but I'm facing suppressive fire. So I am firing 4 dice on 6s, and she is firing 3 dice on 3s. That's a ostensibly good face-to-face roll, but it's not a great face-to-face roll. And she crits me. I make my saves, and I take the face-to-face roll again, and she crits me. And I make my saves, and then I make the face-to-face roll again, and she crits me, but I make my saves. So this is a slightly awkward turn that I can't complain too much about. She's firing shock ammunition so that the Yaogat can't be healed if it comes back, I think, or maybe I'm just being lucky. But this is awkward, and I needed to stop and think well before I began this. What I should have done, and what I eventually came to doing later during the turn, is there's a Gaki here and a Presser here. I should have, after the order count, when all of these models would have generated regular orders, broken the link prior to the impetuous phase, and taken an impetuous order with this Gaki, berserking Andromeda. I'm about 90% sure that's a legal way of doing it. Go to order count, generate your orders, end of the order count, break the link, beginning of impetuous phase, take the impetuous order. It's possible that you can't take the impetuous order. You have to finish the impetuous phase, like the order count rather. So there's not a window where you can be regular and impetuous with Gakis. But even if that's not the case, I should nevertheless have done what I eventually did at this point, which is pause up with the Yaogat and berserk with the Gaki. Now, the Gaki got obliterated. Three dice of shock rounds, tore it apart, and Andromeda passed her armor roll against the damage 14 armor piercing, but it broke her out of suppressive fire, which means now the Yaugat was firing 4 dice on 9s, and she was firing 1 dice on 3s, which is a much, much, much better face-to-face roll, and all I needed to do was spend a 4-point Yaki that I should have spent before. So I basically cocked away like 3 orders this turn, trying to deal with her. And so next face-to-face roll, took her with the Yaugat. I think it actually took like another order after that, but that put her down. And during this movement, the Yaugat is moving along here, and then it comes around here. I get some more smoke down with the Osnat. Whoop. And the Yaugat's terrible, and the Yaugat fights Phoenix. Now, the smoke here is actually not super relevant because Phoenix has 6th sense, but it just offers me a bit of safety in terms of maneuvering up to cover, etc. if I think I need to, or if I need to get into higher ground. Probably didn't need to do it, not a huge deal. And I take the face-to-face roll with Phoenix, and it's inconclusive for like the entire rest of the turn. I blow through every remaining order in this combat group, and eventually kill Phoenix. So, literally 11 orders of gunfighting, and I have killed Andromeda and Phoenix, only with help from that second combat group. Maybe it's not quite 11 orders, but it's just like, no, sorry. I spend 8 orders taking those gunfights, 4 each. Which, you know what, Phoenix is firing 2 dice on 13s. I'm firing 4 dice on 12s. I can't be mad that I eventually win that. That's totally fine, because I don't have core link bonuses. I do have 2 orders left. Before I spend them, I will begin spending a few orders in the second combat group. So bringing a Rassiat on in the first turn is not something that I would always do, but in this case I have a very safe angle of approach. The Rassiat walks on in a table edge down here. Actually, I think it even comes on here, and it just scoots up there, and it takes a volley of shots into this Thorokiti here, who does not have line of fire and gets obliterated. I can then take the corner, Alki's turned around, volley of shots, obliterated, and she might even have been able to be engaged by the Syriate up here now that the way is clear from Phoenix, but in any case, I spend the remaining orders in that combat group, and then the Rassiat pulls back, and 2 kills on top of the 2 kills here, 2 kills there, is very nice. So 4 kills against a 10 order list in the first turn. I've done no objectives, and I've done no classifieds, and I've made very little forward progress. All I have is a couple of remaining orders that I can spend. This Syriat team basically goes boop, 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 and moves, and then moves, and some stuff drops prone, and I get some pitches down, and like that's 100% of it. The Syriat ends up standing here, approximately. The Yaugat is hanging out here, and I've really not had any forward momentum, but I've scored 4 kills. Now, unfortunately, it's a Hector list, which means that my opponent with 6 models has 8 orders, and those orders include Ajax. Now, that said, Phoenix is down, Hector is in a 3-person group that's still intact. My opponent wants to clear off this Syriat. So Hector stands up and he moves up into, see this tower here, moves into that tower. Remember that position Phoenix was in before? He moves to there. And he takes about a 20-inch gunfight with his plasma rifle. Both models are in cover, basically due to how the terrain is set up. He's firing 4 dice on 10s, I'm firing 2 dice on 13s, and we literally just have at it for like 6 orders. Twice Hector has to be doctored back from no wound incapacitation, but he does, and yeah, we just go back and forth at that. The Syriat either survives any hits or wins every face-to-face roll. Hector can't stick a 10. I'm not too concerned about the Syriat dying, and I'm very prepared to drop prone with it if it takes any wounds. It's armor 4, BTS 6, it's semi-plasma resistant, but it just holds. It just pays back all of the bullshit from the first turn, and Hector ends up prone and hanging out. So that's a very, very good turn for me, where a reactive piece in the right place at the right time 100% stalled my opponent's advance, because he'd lost his Feuerback, he'd lost Nessa Alke, he didn't have guns left. Now, if Nessa had been Therasmedes, then super, super likely there's still a gun there, Therasmedes being a he. Because, well, not only does Therasmedes have a 360 visor, so could help defend that area, and has a light rocket launcher, which in ARO is very scary, but he has mimetism -6, which for a Rassiat makes the gunfight much makes it harder to take, particularly if he's being opposed in a face-to-face roll. The Rassiat will be rolling dice on 9s compared to 12s or 13s, whatever Chandra Sergeant Tharasmides is rolling. So basically, I have a ton of grace now, which is really, really good, and I choose to use it to get ahead on scenario. I don't know if this is the right decision, but I think it is, because I do not want to risk not having boxes in hand come the third turn. So this is where Dr. Worm's deployment really mattered. So what happens, and this is, if you're playing Combined Army or Morats or Shazvastio, this is great in supplies. Strongly encourage you to do this. Dr. Worm crawls out this way, the slave drone crawls up that way, and what you do is Dr. Worm moved up to this objective, picked it up easily, 2 dice on 17s, moved back this way towards this objective here, and along the way, the two of them spent an action to hand the box that had been picked up by Dr. Worm over to the slave drone, which then spends all of its orders basically just going back the way that it came. So Dr. Worm then gets this one, again 2 dice on 17s, and he retreats, and they're so fast, 6-4, and comfortably. The slave drone made it all the way back to here, Dr. Worm made it all the way back to, it would have been about there or there, maybe where he made it back to where he started. And all of that took much less than the full number of group orders in my pool. I was able to use the remainder of the orders in that pool. Basically, my opponent had completely gone to ground, everything was hidden, and I didn't feel like going in aggressively after it. I did both of my classifieds. So that was follow-up, heavy infantry. So this team moved up here, follow up the HVT, data scan the HVT, and then basically, cool, hold the fort. The Rassiat tried to take some face-to-face rolls with a suppressive fire Thorakiti. Inconclusive. So the remaining orders were spent basically moving the Osnan up here in case I needed it. So my opponent goes into his second turn. As before, he has an 8 model order pool. Again, as before, if he'd had a few, like if he had a spare Imatron in his second group, it would be a great time to move it into the combat group now. But he's got Hector still here and Ajax still here. And with the Suriat having moved from this position around to this position, he has a way to get Ajax clear. Ajax can now move. So there is some smoke throwing with McKayon and some moving around, etc. to get Hector out of that tower, away from the Suriat, doesn't want to fight anymore. But the long and the short of this turn is that Ajax leaves the link as part of one of those orders, moves to here, blows up a repeater that I've laid, moves to here, kills a Predator that ended up there, moves up to here, and is like 1 order short. He wants to kill the little slave drone holding the objective and then kill this Dartok, but he's literally a short skill short, and he ends up here watching the Dartok. He uses his second movement skill to move using stealth. Why does he have stealth? He's literally the chunkiest model in the faction. Anyway, using stealth to see the Dartok so that the Dartok can't face-to-face him can't hack him without getting a gunshot for its troubles. And that's important because Ajax is very susceptible to info war attacks. Yes, his ballistic skill is not bad, and especially when he's in a linked team with Hector, he has a Tinbot, so his BTS is not bad. And he has Tinbot from Hector, but he's whip 12, which means that if you can isolate and immobilize him, you have bricked him. He is out of the game, doing literally nothing. At best, he can be points in zones. But he manages on that last movement skill to get into range of the Dartok, and my pitches are spent at this point. I've laid pitches out into the midfield. So I go into my third and final turn, and this is the point where the Suriat HRL is once again the hero. It backtracks to here. Ajax is impetuous, so no cover. He's in the open here, and I fire literally 27 rockets into him. Literally 27 rockets. He's dodging on 16s, I'm hitting on 16s. If I had been a HMG, then I would have fired 45 HMG rounds, but I would have been suffering mimetism, and I would not have had continuous damage. And it takes literally 27 rockets to kill Ajax. I think that's probably a little statistically improbable, but what matters is that I get it done. It takes literally, like, it may even have been more than that. It might even have been 30 rockets, because I could fire, I've got 11 orders in that group. I haven't lost any. I've only lost Garkis, no, in Datarazi. So yeah, I think it was either 27 or 30 rockets. So I have 10 orders in that pool with Datarazi down. Anyway, we kill him on like literally the last order, which is good because kind of sweating. Now, it is possible that, much like that first turn where I didn't stop and evaluate the best way to accomplish something, there might have been a better gunfight here. But I don't think there was. Plan B would have had been to have the Osnat team try and make an attack somehow. Maybe pin him down. I'm not sure. He's a natural-born warrior with martial arts, and he's mimetism and a combi rifle. So maybe I can tie him up. Probably the best case is literally just to bum rush him, surround him so that he can't leave combat, and then get Kornak in for a burst 4 berserk attack. Because I can use that against natural-born warrior. That's literally the best case I can think of, apart from just dumb firing rockets into him. And at best, Kornak is going to be causing maybe 9 armor rolls, which is fine. It's good. That should kill him. That actually really should kill Ajax. But so should literally 30 rockets. So I went with the 30 rockets. It's possible I should have paused up and considered whether to continue at like maybe like the 20th rocket. Maybe at the 20th rocket I should have paused and said, okay, I need to think about this because I have to consider whether there's a plan B. Similarly, if I could get into close combat with Garkis and Predators just enough to tie Ajax down, at that point I can start hacking with the Dartok, which is also a worthwhile consideration. Not necessarily as good as just killing him. He resets on a 12, I hit on 13s, it's 2 dice versus 1. That is not a materially better face-to-face roll than 3 rockets on 16 versus a dodge on 16s. It's very, very similar. I have a 1-point stat advantage in the hacking program war, but I'm only burst 2, so I'm not sure. I ended up going for the lethal option, the very brute force option, and I'm not sure if it was the best, but it did work. With Ajax dead and the entirety of my opponent's army otherwise still pinned in the deployment zone, and the Rassiat basically standing up and going into suppressive fire. I know he ran forward. Yes, he ran forward and like stabbed one Thorakiti, and then went into suppressive fire. So my opponent is now down to 7 orders, and that's a bridge too far. He has a crack at doing a classified, and he does so. And annoyingly, it's an engineering classified. I can't remember which one, but that in supplies cancels out my Infowar classified. I can't even remember which one it was, but it does one that counts as one of mine. So what would have been an 8-point win becomes a 7-point win. It is distinctly possible I should have elected not to do data scan and should have just secured the HVT in retrospect. Very strong consideration. Don't often see Intelcom come up, but it did in this game. Nevertheless, 7-1 is a solid win. And overall, kind of like slightly clunky over direct play from me. MAF are not actually an over direct sectoral. They have lots of smoke, they have lots of speed, and they have lots of orders. MAF, I think, should not necessarily be played as a faction that relies on just rolling the most dice with the biggest guns. They are not tremendously suited to that. Ballistic skill 13 native is kind of like the high watermark with very few visual modifiers, at best some smoke shooting in your links. There is, and if you want to lean on mimetism, then you start having to give up other things like ballistic skill. Even the new bull track tag is kind of an example where, yes, it has a HRMC that's burst 5, but it's BS 13. So Morat's compromise on ballistic skill in exchange for lots of advantages in other areas, including like niche ones. Like the veteran rule comes up more and more and more. They have access to more tin bots than you'd expect. And they have access to one of the healthiest order pools in the game. So they really should be trading on a combination of that and their fire team flexibility. That list that I mentioned that could begin the game with literally every model deployed in a Link team is not a meme. Datarazi duos are a great way defensively of giving your Datarazi cover, which makes them harder to kill, which makes their smoke arrows and chain rifle arrows more dangerous. So I am really enjoying Morats. I am beginning to foray slightly back into Combined Army, and I'm also considering a few other options over the next few months. Canberra's attention is kind of focused on Novacore, a very big Australian event that will be running again this year, and the scenarios for that will be Comm Center, Countermeasures, Supplies, Supremacy, and Rescue. So I actually really like the scenario mix. Scenarios that force you to be on mission. In none of those scenarios really allow you to take more than perhaps a single turn off, do some fighting. You have to think about your objectives, and you have to build lists for your objectives, which is why we're looking at lists like this with Dr. Worm. So I'm liking Morats for that, but as a meta consideration, Australia is currently in the middle of a bit of a tag frenzy, so I'm also liking Toha, because you can take more K1 rifles than God, and vanilla combined will basically always be good. One of the reasons actually why I'm kind of liking Morats is that if nothing else, the ability to core link a Yargat sniper gives you a strong answer to the Avatar. I don't know if I would play the Avatar in a mission lineup like Nova Corps. It's very good in, sometimes in Supremacy, it can be very good in Rescue, but it's not necessarily, you build a countermeasures list with an Avatar, you're kind of committing to playing Annihilation with a few extra steps, and potentially risking like a lesser victory. Nevertheless, I don't like the Avatar. It annoys me. I don't like playing it because it's terribly, terribly tense when it comes under fire, because if you just get bad luck, you can lose the game. And I don't like playing with it and winning because you just feel like the Avatar rolled over your opponent and you didn't necessarily contribute very much. But I want lists with answers to the Avatar. I want lists that can be really aggressively hostile to an Avatar, and other things, similarly high watermark gunfighting pieces. So Morats are just about able to do that, although frankly I'm not exactly sure what I would do about a Morat on Overwatch. That's a trickier proposition. I also don't know how I would handle Andromeda, other than to just go Burt with her until someone won the face-to-face roll. Not Andromeda, sorry, although that did happen this game. Atlanta, stuff like that. But we will see. The meta is shaping up in the wake of the fire team's change. There's still a lot to be learned. It's very exciting. I hope to do some more of these battle reports again in future, although as Nova Corps comes closer, I'll probably keep things very slightly closer to the vest, because I don't want to chuck all of my lists that I'm considering up onto the internet. That said, this is one of them, and I think it has some promise, so we'll see. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll see you next time.